We'll call the, Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Mr. Bryson has the land acknowledgement ready.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunashish.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Okay, we'll roll call everybody. All 9 of us are in assembly chambers. Yay. That's pretty exciting. Any changes to the agenda? Anybody? No, we don't have any minutes that I see. Nope. And so the first topic is whale watching operator. I feel like I'm in a echo chamber. Committee update. Ms. Pierce is on Zoom, I hear, and is going to start talking as soon as she comes over. There you go. Thanks, Ms. Pierce. We see you. You look fantastic. So go right ahead.
That's excellent because this hotel room in Sitka is very dark. Thank you. I'm just going to introduce Bob Janes, the owner of Gastineau Guiding, and Dr. Susie Tierlink with NOAA Fisheries Alaska Region Protected Resources Division. I had to look at my notes to make sure I got that right. They will be giving a presentation on the work of the whale watching focus group that's been meeting every 2 weeks for the last several months to come up with some solutions for some of the complaints and comments that we've been getting over the summer about whale watching management. And Dr. Tierlink will talk about NOAA's regulatory capacity, what NOAA does, what whale sense is, and what NOAA can and cannot do. I would encourage you to ask both presenters questions as we go along, and then the 3 of us can take questions at the end. I will note that we're still in this process. And the assembly can expect staff to come forward with some sort of recommended action in the future. But I thought it was important, since we've discussed this focus group a number of times at this committee, to get some faces in front of you before the election, before we take a break, and we can talk about recommended solutions at a later date as soon as the group has finished its work. So
great. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Yep.
Sorry.
We have to, Mr. Janes and Dr. Tierlink, if you would come on up, and you set up, Madam Clerk, here or at the table? Okay. Come on up. Just when you start talking, identify yourselves for the record so that we have it for posterity. Thank you for coming. Appreciate the work you've all done already. And we're looking forward to hearing about what you got so far. And it's okay with you if we ask questions in the middle of it? Mr. Janes?
Yes, my name is Bob Janes.
Oh, press the little button so your light turns green.
Oh, okay, a red button and a green button. My name is Bob Janes. You want my address and everything? You don't need that this time. I feel a little small here because I not only couldn't start the computer myself, but I didn't hear the word doctor before my name. And
sorry if you didn't earn it.
I just don't know
Sorry.
quite what's going, if I were to start here. Okay, so the screen is full and it shows Juneau Commercial Whale Watching Fleet. Okay, that's us. I see a number of our members here. Thank you for coming. We've been diligently at it for the last 8 weeks, and we gave up a lot of afternoon sun for this job. So, but I know you do that all the time too. Thank you for that. And I'm also impressed. Everybody is here. That's great.
Pretty exciting.
We really were set out to come up with a revised, updated, and a little more solid form of TVMP recommendations. And I want to make it a point at this time that these are recommendations. We have not gone to the TBMP group as a whole yet. So none of these recommendations that we have come up with are solid in stone yet. I just want you to know that, but I expect they will be. Also, I want you to know that we had a heck of a time with this chore. This was not an easy chore to attack. I guess that's the right word. We did attack it, and we did it diligently, but we couldn't get everywhere we wanted to go. We talked a lot about limited entry. That's not something we could come up with. We all think it's important. We just don't know how to do it. We don't know how to regulate it. We don't know how to put it into place as a voluntary compliance group. So we put that one in the back of the in the back of the line for future consideration by either you, us, or us and together with you and harbors. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it'll have to happen in a different way than we were able to happen. But we did come up with some recommendations for future guidelines, and I think I'll go. Well, I will. I know I'll go for them right now because that's why I'm here. How do I just hit shift? I hit shift. Shift. Okay. I can't read all of this, but for some reason there's black up here. Do you know how to get rid of this, Rory? This participant has enabled closed captioning. I don't need that there. Okay, now we got it. That's a beautiful Allen Marine boat with three orcas plying with it, and I want you to know, and in all these slides, that the 100-yard rule is being adhered to. These boats look like they're closer, but with the kinds of lenses we have now and the distortion on the water, 100 yards can look like 10 yards to us. So I suspect these whales are at least 100 yards away from the Allen Marine boat. But you can see the delight of the people on that boat. And that's why whale watching is such an amazing opportunity for people here in Juneau that visit Juneau and our locals. So we in the past, we've monitored the volume and use of onboard PA systems, and we've when transiting CVJ waters, we try to keep a 200-yard distance from local boats that are out fishing. I am going to be the first to admit that we're not perfect at that, and there are things we can work harder on. We have to work harder on that to make it a sustainable industry here in Juneau. All right. Hit end. I hit shift.
It's 2 slides.
What?
How do you go back? There are 2 slides at the beginning.
It goes to show you. I've missed 2.
Yeah.
That shows how prepared I am, how much I rehearsed this. I didn't even know I missed 2 slides. But they're in the slides that we gave you.
Stop sharing for just a moment and see how
This is why I married Dawn. One of the reasons.
There's your beginning.
There's my beginning.
That's
Oh, there we are. Okay. 27 years of developing guidelines. I started out with Kirby Day 27 years ago, putting together TBMP and TBMP guidelines. And we've come a long ways in 27 years. But we still have a long ways to go, because as we have continued to improve our, I guess, our practices, we also have been given a lot more people to deal with. So our practices still aren't perfect. Again, that boat, I wonder about those people in that boat. They're all looking at the shoreline except one. That
To advance it, you just go forward and backwards arrow if you wanted to go back.
okay, that's what I thought I was doing. But anyway, again, impacts to coastal zones. We have taken it upon ourselves to strive to minimize impacts of wakes. Again, we're not perfect at it. Wakes are a weird thing. They're back there behind your boat and you're always looking forward so you don't run into somebody. And I know as a captain that I'm not always aware of my wake, and we need to work harder at that. We're going to work harder at that. We hope to do a wake study next summer once we get going out in Auk Bay, so that we're able to identify what different boats make. What kind of different boats make different wakes, because it's not all the same. So no wake zone in the Smugglers Cove, Spoon Island area. I would say we're 99% good on that one. We've really done well on not cutting through there. We will not utilize the Indian Island Passage as a shortcut into and out of Auk Bay at cruising speed. I'm going to go forward here and show you what I'm talking about. We're saying we won't use this shortcut right here. Right through here. It's a good one not to use anyway. You can see it's a little bit weird. This is our. Yes.
Have you talk in the microphone? Just bring the mic with you. Yeah.
Bring it with
Mr.
you.
James, can I ask you a clarifying question before you continue?
Yeah.
These
high tech.
things are new, or they are the existing guidelines?
These are existing guidelines that I'm talking about now.
Okay, so you
But-
have not gotten, this is all what you're already doing. You have not yet gotten to whatever you were
I
proposing.
will be. Yeah. I'll
Okay,
let
I
you
just
know
want to
when we
make
get
sure
the
that
new
we're
stuff.
still in the.
But
part.
the reason I bring this up right now is because we are adhering to this as much as we are able to get our captains to do that. But sometimes they like to shortcut one way or the other and not stay in that lane. So we need to work more on that. I know we need to work more on that. Okay, forward. Oh. Okay, what the heck? Well, we promise, Susie, that we'll follow all NOAA regulations regarding marine mammal viewing. We do a pretty good job of that, by the way. Although some of the pictures that are taken from shore don't represent our, I guess, our compliance. The fleet does a pretty good job of staying 100 yards off whales. Once in a while, one comes up closer to the boats, and that's just the way it is. We try to either back off on our engine powers or back away or just do nothing. We've spent 30 minutes observing whales, and we will continue with that, but we've added something to that. We agree to minimize engine idling wherever reasonable, and that is particularly true at Statter Harbor when we are loading. Majority of whale watching operators belong to Whale Sense. That's Susie's creation. How many years ago? 10 or so years ago? 15? In Alaska. That's been 15 years. It's a fabulous program, and everyone does belong to it, and Susie will be talking more about it. So the majority of our whale watching tour operators belong to Whale Sense. Current issues: public perception of commercial fleet whale watching behavior. This was, I think, in the paper or on social media, I know, and it does look a little bit unorganized from the shoreline. But as you can see from this slide, this is up in the North Pass area, just south of North Pass. You can see the boats that are surrounding what is probably a whale or a group of whales. You can see two boats powering up from the south, right near where it says North Pacific Ocean, that is against our whale sense guidelines. We do not power full power that close to whales. We cut back, and the boat coming down from north, leaving a big wake. I don't know what that boat's doing. That boat should not be approaching that group of whale watching boats in that way, and it's probably not a whale watching boat. I'd bet quite a bit of money on that, because we just don't see our fleet here in Juneau behaving that way, because we're all very cognizant of whale sense. Okay. Background, on June 26th, we had a meeting. We decided 18 operators and captains to form a group and develop recommendations for additional future whale watching guidelines. You can see we met on June 26th, July 17th, July 27th. They were beautiful evenings. August 10th, August 17th, and August 31st. I think every one of those was a sunny evening. The progress we made, I will show you as we move forward here on different slides. I won't stick with these ones and just read them. Other than we did develop a Locals Day event, which was very successful. We had about our first one. It was how much? $15, I think, and we had over 100 participants. Is that right, Serene? The Locals Day. 235 people, and that all went to the food bank here in Juneau. All the money raised on that. So a lot of locals that we've never seen in Ock Bay or on boats participated. So we felt it was very, very successful, because it did sort of open up the door to a lot of Juneauites that have not necessarily gone out on whale watches. So here are the new TVM guideline recommendations. We have agreed to eliminate whale sightings guaranteed marketing April 1st through May 15th and September 15th through October 31st. There are operators that were very adamant that their guarantee is part of their sales pitch, their sales strength. So we did not come to consensus on eliminating whale watching's guaranteed at this time, but we did come to a consensus that we could eliminate it on these dates. And who knows, it might turn into a full season before we know. We agreed inspected vessels, and this is a big problem we've had. We agreed to navigate the Coghlan Cut at 5 to 7 knots when other vessels or people are present, and 10 knot maximum speed when no vessels or people are present, or go around Coghlan Island at full speed. So you won't see any whale watching boats in our fleet going through the Coghlan Cut faster than
Mr.
7
James, we've got a
knots.
question. Ms. Hale has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the importance of inspected vessels?
Oh, that's vessels larger than 6 passengers. It's just a Coast Guard nomenclature for, you need to, they need to be inspected every year. And they have a lot more stringent operating conditions.
And we have another one. Ms. Sue Scandies has a question.
Thanks.
Excuse me?
Thank you, Madam.
Scandies has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up on that same vein. So are you using that term inspected vessels interchangeably with members of the commercial whale watching fleet? Or is that a subset of the whale watching fleet?
That is a subset, because we have other operators with small boats, 6-pack boats, 6 people maximum, that do not have to be inspected.
Perfect.
So we might want to clean this up so it's a little more understandable for people that don't talk about it every day like we do. I'm going to check my slides here. I don't know where the hell I am. Sorry. Okay. Inspected vessels, we will not go faster than 5 to 7 knots. I don't know why we put 5 to 7. I guess you just kind of get it in the middle there. Or we will go around Coghlan Island. So we hope that takes care of some of the wake issue. Yes,
Gita, go ahead.
I can't
Yeah.
call on you.
No
Sorry.
worries. Just wondering if, the 5 to 7 knots could even be reduced in instances where you have traditional Tlingit canoes in those waters. A couple of years ago, I know that there was a swamping of one of the canoes by one of the whale watching vessels.
This was a tough subject for us too, because we know that some boats make wakes at 5 knots. And we do know that canoes have been swamped on the beach in that spot because it's such a popular beach. We talked a lot about going around the island and not even ever using the Coghlan Cut. And I think we came to the consensus that we would try this year. 5 to 7 knots if there are boats there, 10 knots if there are no boats there, and as a recommendation for this year. And if it doesn't work, if there's still issues, and we don't want to put any of the canoes, anybody's boat or kayaks or canoes at risk, we will switch to going all the way around the island. So again, this I think is a first step that we're taking, and I hope it works, but we don't know if it's going to solve all the problems. And we're willing with all of this stuff to go the extra mile if we need to make it a safe place and a good place. I want to let you know that going around Coghlan Island adds about a gallon of fuel to a trip. Doesn't sound like much unless you're doing hundreds of trips every summer, and a gallon of fuel at a mile a gallon is that's expensive. But we're going to do it. The cost is not the consideration. What the consideration is time, cutting through the Coghlan Cut, but we will. We'll make it work either way. We're ready to, with all of this stuff. I want everyone to know that this is the first shot at it this year, and we're going to listen and we're going to stick together. And I want to keep a very close relationship with you, the assembly, which we haven't, I don't feel like we've had enough of in the past, so that we can consistently every summer fill you in on our activities and our operating procedures, just like we are today. I want to do that every single fall about this time. So if you have us back, I'd love to do that. Okay. Why? Okay, I went to this one already. This is another one though. On the track in, we have agreed on an imaginary line, that yellow line between 2 Derby orange markers that are there already, and they're going to stay there. We've talked to the Derby people, and we will slow down to 5 knots prior to reaching the white buoy. So now we're slowing down at that little white buoy up in front. We will slow down prior to that. And it doesn't look like much in this picture, but if you look at the size of those boats, it's probably a dozen boat lengths. Well, not quite that, maybe 6 boat lengths earlier than slowing down at the white buoy, so that we impact the harbor less, and the houses to the right, to the south of that line. As I said earlier, we're considering a wake study to be completed during the 2024 season. And we will monitor wakes in this area with every different boat every company has, because they all put out a different wake, so that the operators know what their wake level is on a scale of 1 to 10. You know, where are you? We agree to, in open water, this is a new thing, 100 to 200 yards, 8 vessels on a group of boats, 200 plus yards, 8 more vessels. Vessels would move in and out of the inner circle in 15-minute cycles, with a total of 30 minutes of any one vessel. So we're trying to spread the vessels out, the 16 vessels that we've had on whales before, and have half of them in the inner circle for 15 minutes and the other half in the outer circle for 15 minutes, and then trade off. We'll see how that works on the water. I got hands rising. I know these are going to be really easy questions, so I'm ready.
They are.
Ms. Wall, please.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. What kind of rejection is this from the norm, I guess? Or, you know, if you get
What kind of
a
reduction
big
is
day.
it from this year?
this
Yeah.
year?
It's not an overall reduction. It's a reduction in the number of vessels that are within the 100 to 200 yard limit. So we won't have more than 8 vessels trying to scrunch in to that 100-yard area. They will need to wait their turn to go in. It should give the 8 boats that are within the 100-yard boundary a more room to maneuver should the whales start moving towards them, because part of what a whale watching captain has to do is run away from the whales sometimes, because they come towards the boat. And if it's scrunched up with 16 boats, it's a lot harder to maneuver. So it's a shot in the dark. We're going to give it a try this year as a recommendation. We don't know quite what's going to happen, but we're going to give it a good shot.
Is there a limit to the number today? It's not 8. That's what I thought your question was. Is there a limit to the number that can be around a whale today that you're following?
Every day?
No, right now you say no more than 8 vessels. Is there currently such a limit that you are agreeing to in your current?
Oh, yeah,
TTM?
there is.
Isn't that-
There isn't. There is no
There is none. Okay.
limit. There is no limit currently. There's a time limit,
Okay.
30 minutes, but
Not a number.
not a number of
Okay,
boats. So this
thank
is new.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So just to make sure I'm crystal on this. So current practice, you have greater than, it's normal in this season to have more than 8
Yes,
boats within that. So you could
yes.
have 16 boats around.
We could have up to the number of boats that's in the fleet, as many as it'll fit there. There's no
Okay.
limit at all.
Okay, thank you.
But there's a time limit, 30 minutes.
Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. James, could you tell us, in terms of this wake study, will you be looking at cumulative wakes, so that wakes that pile on top of each other, and also cross wakes that become very confused? Will that study be looking at that?
I am not an expert in wake dynamics. I'll tell you that. They go in all directions. As you know, you can see them going in all directions, and that's when they get tricky. So I don't know. I don't know what this study will address. It's probably mostly I would hope it's addressing lumps in the water, you know, which is lots of wakes, but it's going to look at what size wake each individual boat puts out. I know that because there are some boats that put out a much bigger wake than other boats. And those boats have to have a greater sense of connection to the boating community when they're out there making those wakes. So at least we'll know what boats make what wakes. Whether I'm just guessing it won't address the turbulence that is caused by many boats, but it will address the wake put out by individual boats, the size of the wake and what its dynamics are. But I'm not an expert in that. When we see somebody that will do a wake study, we all feel like we're going to get a really good report. Right. So we also agree on shoreline, and here's a good example of it. 100 to 200 yards, 4 vessels. And there you see the 4 vessels on a whale that is about 200 yards away towards the shore, not crowding it towards the shore. We have done that this year informally, but we've never had it down in writing. So this is a new recommendation. 200 plus yards, 12 vessels. So, you know, if there's more than 4 vessels, the rest of them have to be way out there. Vessels would move in and out of the inner circle in 15-minute cycles with a total of 30 minutes on any one vessel. So this is all new when there's a whale along the shoreline, which is quite often the case. So hopefully that will relieve some of that pressure of more than 4 boats squeezing a whale up against the shoreline.
Scandies has a question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I know we just asked about if there are any limits currently, and there's not. But I'm just trying to get a sense, because lots of people in this room breathe this every day, and you have a way greater practical sense of how many boats fit around a whale than I do, because I see this is also giving us 16 boats. So is that kind of practically what you have right now that you could put, or that is, you know, in practice? And right now it's more about spacing?
Now it's more about spacing. It's just a line of boats. Some will fall off naturally, but I would think you would normally see about 8 in the line.
Okay.
And with these 12 vessels, 4 more kind of falling off a bit, but maybe not 200 yards.
Yep,
So yeah, again, it's the captains, and it's our desire to take care of the resource, the whales. I hate to call them a resource, but they are a multi-million-dollar resource for Juneau. But I don't like to call them that. I like to call them our friends and wildlife. And I'm going to tell everybody in this room that we, as operators, go out of our way to operate in a way that will protect that wildlife.
Mr.
So,
James, I have a question. There's something like 72 boats that are permitted to do this, correct?
That's correct.
How many are generally out at any given time? Like, are there times where there's 20 or 50 or 10?
I'm gonna ask some of the captains out here that. I would think more like 16. That's my guess at a time. On the water at one time. They can be out, but they're spread out up
But
from all the way.
there can be something like 70 boats all out at the same time. Obviously, they're all over the place, but they're basically on busy days, there's 70 boats driving.
Yeah, Yeah.
That's everybody's,
Jaylene,
just for the record, people are nodding their heads at that. Okay.
Jaylene's a captain out there quite a bit, so she can,
If, sir, ma'am, if you're gonna talk, you do have to come up to the microphone. And
yes, but you have a sweet, quiet voice.
you identify
We
yourself,
all want to hear you.
identify yourself for the record and make sure yeah, it's on green.
Yeah.
So I have to identify myself for the record.
Yes, ma'am.
You have to hold up to the,
My name is Jaylene Bidlin. I'm an operator out on the water. I'm an operator out on the water.
Hey, great, thanks.
I think that the goal between, and 16 boats, I think to your point, probably sounds like a lot. But I think that the goal that we're trying to achieve here is that we're not trying to hide it from anyone. Like there are 75 whale watching boats in the Juneau fleet. And at this point, all 75 could go and watch one single whale for up to 30 minutes. And so I think the goal here is to try to minimize that. And it might not sound like a big change, but I think that this will at least start change in getting into our captains' minds and in that we need to spread out. And I think that there could be improvements made in the future possibly, and we'll see how it goes. But this is only a fraction that is allowed with what we're recommending to watch one single whale at a time. So I think it's encouraging the community to spread out is what we're going for.
All right, thank you. Thank you for coming up and letting us know that.
yeah. Go ahead.
In your experience, ma'am, are there times when there's 20 boats around a whale or
Yeah.
some big number, 25? There have been, there
Yeah.
are. Okay. Thank you.
And I mean, I think that perspective, to Bob's point earlier, isn't always shown from someone who's not seeing. Perspective on the water is very skewed, especially if you're looking at it from the shore at what looks like several boats. And to be honest with you, at times those might be local boats who also stopped to look at this beautiful, incredible whale. And I think that from the shore, it's hard to determine how many of them are actually part of the whale watching fleet or local boats who
Right.
also stopped in.
Yep.
Yeah, it can be several boats, but I think that a lot of operators have taken the time and have literally paid captains to go to captains meetings and talk about how to separate and how to give the whales more space and how to keep boats moving if there's already too many boats. And we've gone above what any sort of regulation or recommendation has called for. And now we're just starting to put it on paper.
Do you have a question for, no, okay, thanks for coming on up. Okay, Mahal Gidak has a question for Mr. James.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. James, just wondering, think you said this or maybe you referenced it for the whale sense and everybody who's a part of these recommendations moving forward. Does this include all of the operators in Juneau? So all 75 boats are in agreement with what is being proposed here on these pages?
It does include all operators that are part of Whale Sense, and to the best of my knowledge, these are recommendations to TBMP. Now the entire TBMP group needs to approve these recommendations before they go into action. So, but it does, we will be presenting them to as many of the 75 operators that are part of TBMP that are willing to come to a meeting and listen and talk.
Mr. James, how many operators are part of TBMP?
All of them
All of
are.
them. Okay, so all 75 are.
Why is
TBMP.
this doing
Okay.
this? Okay. Go back there. Okay. Okay, I'm almost finished. I know this is taking some time. Anyway, what I want to make a point at, and I think I made a point already, is we as operators in this format, in this group, agree that limited entry is a important next step for Juneau. We've been talking about it for several years, but we don't have any tools to work with. We don't know whether it would go through NOAA or Docks and Harbors, whether the assembly would recommend it. But the bottom line is, with the number of cruise ship passengers that come to Juneau, and we're very, don't get me wrong, we're very grateful for that business that comes to Juneau and keeps Juneau's economy, helps keep Juneau's economy vital and bright. We still believe that limited entry in the whale watching corridor is important to start talking about and start considering and start finding ways to do it, because it just can't be managed any more than we're trying to manage it right now. I think we're pushing the boundaries of management success.
Mr. James, do some of the operators launch from Auk Bay? Or where do they launch from? Is it 90% from there, or what's the?
I think Dawn knows, and I see our
Dawn is,
harbor.
okay,
They are all. Yeah, Allen Marine has a private dock, but the rest are in Auk Bay, and Auk Bay. Statter Harbor has been incredible, and I want to thank Matt at keeping us all in line, but accommodating all of that traffic every day is not an easy job. And your people at Statter Harbor do a great job of it. The new facility, the new drop-off facility is just a bright light in the dark night.
but Allen Marine has its own dock, so they can. CBJ wanted to do some limited entry. It could limited entry on the CBJ docks, but as long as Allen Marine has a dock, that's a different thing.
Yes,
Miss
Rory.
Watt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And just to add, some vessels use Fisherman's Bend, which is also privately owned.
Okay.
Yeah, managing limited entry through the docks is probably the most difficult way to go, because we have different docks, different places, and I don't know how it could be done, but it's
Okay, thanks.
worth talking about. Thank you. Next slide, our promise, a strong commitment to responsible practices. Tour operators will continue to adhere to NOAA regulations. We do that without question, and Susie can attest to that, I hope. Operators will continue to agree voluntarily, follow whale sense and TVMP guidelines. Again, whale sense and TVMP are voluntary. So to get all of these operators and all of their employees and all of their captains to sign on to this is not an easy job. And we have meetings in the spring, and we hope we don't miss somebody that happens to be out camping that weekend or something. But that's the goal, and that's our promise, to stick with this. We have to. We have too many people not to. And finally, our promise, we will continue to take every precaution to value and protect the well-being of our whales. And we do that without question. When one of our whales was struck 2 weeks ago, it was devastating to most of the people in the industry, the guides and the captains, seeing the whale floating on the surface and then on the beach was an awful and a devastating experience. And I think it ripped some hearts out for a few hours. So we will continue every precaution to take care of the resource and the whales, the well-being of the whales. I think that's a good way to put it. So these are the whale watching fleet members. You probably recognize some of them. Maybe some of them are friends. That boat there belongs to, is that your boat? Yeah, look at that. And you must be waving there. So somewhere, look at those happy people. That is what we sell right there, that kind of experience. So these are the people that will be signing on to these recommendations. Some of them were involved in helping develop them. 16, in fact, were part of developing them. So now we go to, now that we've presented to you, we go to them and as members of TVMP and get them to sign on. So that's it for my presentation. Any more questions? And Gushis, thank you so much for making yourselves available tonight to listen to this. And I know it's something you have to probably reluctantly deal with a lot, but thank you for being a part of it tonight. And I hope we can make it a successful effort together. And we'll be reporting to you.
Thank you, Mr. James, for organizing all those meetings and going to all of them. And you have more on whale sense. Thank you. And Dr. Tierling, just identify yourself for the record and then have at it.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Susie Tierling. I work at NOAA Fisheries Alaska Region in the Protected Resources Division. Let me make sure my slides are presenting to everybody. Better. Right. The protected resource that my division focuses most on are marine mammals. And I have studied humpback whales in the Juneau area and throughout Alaska for the last 15 years. The focus of my PhD research was a multidisciplinary approach to looking at the benefits and drawbacks of whale watching tourism. And I used the Juneau tour industry as a case study. So I'm quite familiar. Since joining the NOAA team, I lead our humpback whale programs, including the Whale Sense program, which I'll touch on again. Thank you for having me here today so I can share more of the federal management perspective on whale watching. Humpback whales in Southeast Alaska predominantly breed in Hawaii. And this is a segment of the population, a distinct population segment, or a DPS, that is not listed under the Endangered Species Act. And that's because they're recovered. However, they are still listed under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which offers protections to all marine mammals regardless of the status of their populations. But we do have other DPSs that feed in Alaska. And in Southeast Alaska, we have the Mexico DPS, which is listed under the Endangered Species Act. So in our area, we assume those laws apply to all whales in Southeast Alaska because we can't tell them apart. We can't tell which one's a Mexico DPS whale and which one's a Hawaii DPS whale. Both the MMPA and the ESA have a prohibition on take. I want to define that because it's really what I want to talk about today. Take is defined under the MMPA as harassment, hunt, capture, or kill, or an attempt to do any of those things to a marine mammal. The MMPA further defines harassment as any act of pursuit, torment, annoyance, or something that has a potential to injure or disturb a marine mammal, causing a disruption of their behavioral patterns. And this can be challenging to assess, especially for an animal that spends most of its life underwater. In 2001, over 20 years ago, NOAA Fisheries implemented a new level of regulation to help avoid take, to give people a more clear guideline, actually a law that would prevent take from happening. And that was the 100-yard rule for Alaska. You cannot approach humpback whales closer than 100 yards or put your boat in the path of an oncoming whale such that they would come into your 100 yards. It's also important to note that the 100-yard rule is really helpful, but it's not the only factor that goes into whether or not take will occur. So I want to cover some of the ways that take would happen. Obviously, a vessel strike is a really obvious way. There's also the physical presence of boats and that could disturb the movement of whales, and the noise from boats can actually cause auditory damage or just prevent them from going about their business. It can make it challenging for them to communicate with one another, socialize, or even find food. So how much noise is too much? And this question is especially concerning for our local tour industry because we have the largest whale watching industry in the world. For perspective, I've collected this index of fleet sizes for some of the popular whale watching destinations throughout the US. Stellwagen Bank is comprised of several communities and harbors that collectively have 14 whale watching boats. Monterey, California, 12. Maui, Hawaii has roughly 45 whale watching boats, but it's important to note that those are separated on the island between two separate harbors, and they're roughly 50-50 viewing and separate viewing tour areas. And also important that one of those was in Lahaina, and the devastation of the fires has essentially taken out that fleet. Friday Harbor is the most popular whale watching port in the San Juan Islands. They target whale watching killer whales, and there's approximately 10 whale watching boats out of that port. And our little Juneau has, depending on how you count it, at least 72 whale watching vessels. This is further compounded by the geography and topography we have around here. We have very narrow passageways, and the sound is trapped and reverberating in some of these narrow channels. I also find it interesting that Juneau, compared to any of these areas, has far fewer whales. So those 72 whale watching boats are concentrating that effort onto many fewer whales, in some cases an order of magnitude.
Dr. Tierling, we have a question from Ms. Hale, and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Tierling, for being here. This is really great information. The previous slide where you talked about the different numbers of whale watching vessels in those locations, do you know how or if they are regulated in those locations, like how the number is controlled?
Through the chair. Yeah, thank you. There are no permit systems in place for whale watching in Juneau, anywhere in Alaska, or anywhere in the United States. Washington State attempted to pass a permit system on a state level law, and it failed. There are limits for the number of whale watching boats in Maui, and it is that happens through city level harbor management. But it's not actually a law. It's more of a pragmatic approach to differentiating the fleet.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you for coming and presenting tonight, but I was a little confused at something that you said. You had mentioned that Juneau did not have, you just said it a few minutes ago, that we didn't have the largest whale population, or we had a smaller whale population. I'd always heard that the Alexander Archipelago had the largest concentration of humpback whales because we're the Pacific of the, or the nursery of the Pacific, and that's where they all go to eat. And even on the map that you have presented here, the largest circle coming from the winter breeding area is right by Juneau. So on the map that you presented us indicated that, yes, there is a larger concentration of humpback whales, which
Okay.
would kind of lead to those numbers. So maybe you could just clarify that a little bit. Thank
Dr.
you.
Tierley.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Part of this depends on how you're quantifying the abundance. So in some of these areas, if there's a migratory population, for instance, Monterey, California, there's a much higher number over the course of the season. Juneau is more of a final destination for feeding for humpback whales. However, to give some reference to the numbers, I have others I could share, but I'll just give some anecdotes. In the Juneau area, we see between 100 and 120 individual animals that might pass through the Juneau area at any given time throughout our season. Maui, Hawaii, for example, has closer to 10,000, potentially 15,000, depending on how you're looking at the tour area overlap. So to reiterate, we have a really healthy population. I'm not saying that it isn't an important ecologically. It's just that the animals, once they're here, have a really high site fidelity, and they tend to stay in the certain areas longer. And the season's worth of vessel presence is concentrated on a fewer number of whales.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yeah, I did the same thing to Mr. Jane, so I want to make sure I'm crystal on that too. So looking at the slide with the popular whale watching destinations. So the summarize kind of your response to Mr. Bryson. We have more boats, depending on how you count it, less whales, some of the other spots, less boats, more whales.
Correct.
Okay.
And there is certainly less whales that are part of the Juneau tour area over the course of the season than any of these other spots.
Perfect. Thank you.
To provide an international example, Hervey Bay, Australia is the self-proclaimed whale watching capital of the world. And indeed, the whale watching in this community has really infiltrated their culture and their economy. And this community is about twice the size of Juneau. They had 18 whale watching boats, and they reduced those numbers down to 12 because of concerns of vessel crowding and vessel disturbance. And by contrast, there's about 1,200 humpback whales that use Hervey Bay over the course of the season. And again, for the Juneau area, we have about 1/10 that number. In Juneau, we have a lot of boats. This is what we're talking about. And the number is increasing. And almost all, not all, but most have a money back guarantee. And while Juneau whale watching has proven to deliver on its promise to see whales during a 2 or 3 hour tour out of Hawk Bay, the dependability of this is something that we ought not take for granted. There's not always a lot of whales around Juneau. And there's in fact a lull in the whale numbers that seems to be pretty predictable in June, where we have just 1 or 2 whales out for the entirety of the fleet to meet their whale guarantee. And I dare say that the industry in some ways is really propped up by 2 female whales that really have become the celebrity superstars of Juneau whale watching. Flame and Sasha. They're both productive females who spend most of their summer here, if not all, and they have a very high tolerance for vessel activity. In addition to shoulder season, sometimes in June where the numbers can be low, climate change, for example, can really change the distribution of humpback whale abundance. they're really resourceful, and as prey changes, they're adaptable and they're going to change their habits to find food. And an example of this is in May, for the first time in 15 years studying whales in this area, we had days in the Juneau Tour area where there were no whales. I hadn't seen this before. And when a whale would poke her head into the Juneau area, there were dozens of boats vying for a look. I can't imagine how challenging it would have been to be running whale watching tours. I am concerned for growing.
Can I ask a question? I've always likened this sort of thing to a crowded restaurant. So if it's really crowded, but the food's really good, you're going to tolerate it. If it's really crowded and loud and noisy and the food's not that good, you're not going. So do you have any data to suggest that's true around here? Is the food so great that the whales are willing to tolerate the noise and the boats, or what can you say about that?
Thank you. That concept, I believe, applies. When the food is good, it's worth the squeeze. You know, they're going to spend time looking for food. I also have seen anecdotally through my time on the water that there are some whales that are just far more habituated or tolerant to vessel activity than others, some that won't tolerate that many boats. And I think that actually feeds really well into my point that if the prey shifts, the whales will shift too. And my concern is that there's a growing industry that relies on whales to be here. And those whales migrate thousands of miles and are really accustomed to searching broadly for food. They may not always be available. As a humpback whale biologist, I would recommend companies anticipate fluctuations in whale numbers in the future. And I would urge businesses to foster resilient business models that aren't overly reliant on a migratory and highly mobile resource. NOAA Fisheries has rolled out a voluntary measures to help mitigate potential impacts of whale watching and define the best practices. One of the ways that we've done this is through the Whale Sense program. And to the credit of the Juneau whale watching industry, they were the first to champion and accept and bring in this program in a voluntary fashion to the Alaska region. And they really deserve credit for seeking out this opportunity and implementing these standards on their tours. I'm impressed by their efforts and their dedication. And further, seeing many of these same industry leaders come together and work one another with their competitors to make new recommendations under TBMP, I am heartened to see them thinking about solutions. And while I am proud of our fleet for their intention and commitment to the Whale Sense values and the cooperations under TBMP, we must admit that neither Whale Sense nor TBMP address the number of whale watching boats. It's also important to mention that it's not just commercial whale watching boats. We have recreational boaters who are very interested in seeing the wildlife in their backyard. Recreational boaters like myself like to go out and see whales, and NOAA Fisheries knows that the outreach we do has to also reach those audiences, and that as we think through the best way forward, we need to also consider non-commercial whale watching boats. So some days there's lots of whales and they're distributed around the tour area, and the boats are able to distribute in the same way. On other days, there's only one or two whales or groups of whales, and the fleet must concentrate and share the viewing opportunity, sometimes with dozens of other boats. It's not uncommon for there to be around upwards of 30 boats watching one whale or a group of whales. Of course, that includes our recreational boaters as well. And we don't know the answer to this question. Is take occurring? And We are looking into this, but while we don't know, it is possible the take is occurring. And it might even be intuitive to interpret that at some point it must be. Every boat in the fleet can operate with consideration and respect for wildlife that they're viewing, but at some point, simply the number of whale watching boats is going to tip those scales. NOAA Fisheries implements the MMPA and ESA to reduce and prevent take of our trust species. And while we are concerned about those potential impacts, our process follows the science. And in this case, we don't have all the information that we need to confidently draw conclusions. And that's not to say that we don't have any information. There have been some studies directed at Juneau whale watching, both community, land-based surveys, and hormone studies, which are ongoing. Some of the things we've learned from these are that Juneau area humpback whales behavior changes as the number of boats around them increases. And we know that stress response as seen through hormone blubber is challenging to translate into long-term impacts, and how do we consider if that is take or if that is not take. So while interesting, it's complicated. And we know that there's a high level of community concern, one of the reasons that we're here today. And that concern is noticed in the broad Juneau community, but it's also certainly present in the whale watching industry itself. And then lastly, we know that passengers who fill out surveys say that when they're going on a whale watch, they really want to get close to whales. That's very important. So to wrap up here, we often get the question if NOAA Fisheries can implement caps or permits or limitations on the number of boats. However, NOAA's jurisdiction is relative to the resource itself, the whales. So we can't control how many people operate businesses in Juneau. We cannot control how many boats are utilizing state waters in their business. And if NOAA were to explore regulatory solutions to these concerns, they would have to be framed in a context relative to the whales themselves. I've provided some examples here of things that NOAA Fisheries might explore, but I want to be really clear that these are just examples and they're not an indication of what NOAA may or may not pursue. Distance to whales, is we've done this before. In 2001, the 100-yard rule in Alaska, there's a similar one in Hawaii. And in other areas for other species, NOAA has issued rules for larger distances. As you might imagine, as those distances grow, the viability of whale watching decreases. We also have the jurisdiction to regulate speed around whales. This particular measure is most effective for mitigating ship strike. It wouldn't necessarily address the vessel disturbance of whales who are operating at slow speeds, watching whales. And we also have the jurisdiction to limit the amount of underwater sound that humpback whales and other marine mammals are exposed to. And a pragmatic approach to this would be to use a proxy and limit the number of boats near whales. Now, my concern is that if NOAA ever pursued tightening regulations such that they looked to adopt these principles, that it could devastate the Juneau whale watching industry simply because it's been so built up, so reliant on the ability to operate as it is now. For example, if NOAA were to limit the number of boats around whales, for example, stating a number of boats that could be within 200 or 300 yards, where would all the other boats go? What would they do with their time? And what would happen if they had promised to see a whale, but there were too many boats to stop? So for this concern,
NOAA recommends that the city and borough of Juneau investigate ways to help Juneau's whale watching industry secure a more sustainable model and help to ensure that the industry avoids and reduces take where possible for this precious marine mammal resident. And we understand that there are options available to CBJ that to limit the number of whale watching boats that are not within NOAA's authority to implement. But NOAA remains available in this process to discuss and consult ways to effectively and equitably consider options for limiting the number of boats in an effort to ensure a sustainable future for the whale watching industry. We hope for the sake of the whales and for the sake of the industry and the families and the community members and everybody who is really benefits from having whales in our backyard, that the city and borough of Juneau will take steps to ensure that the industry is sustainable long into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for Dr. Tierling? Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you so much for that really informative presentation. You talked about kind of stress hormone levels of whales. What do we know about strikes in Juneau and relationship to other communities and number of boats?
Through the chair. When there are more boats and there are more whales, there are more interactions. And we collect data on vessel strikes. We do this through self-reports, through observations. We do necropsies of dead animals on beaches. And through our study of Juneau area humpback whales, we're collecting data on new scars that show up on whales, and we can see, these non-lethal vessel strikes. However, this source of data is really challenging to meter because you have to account for the amount of effort that's out there. There's a lot more effort in this area. But generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that as the number of boats goes up and the number of whales goes up, we see that track. The most effective mitigation against ship strike is vessel speeds. And so when we have concerns, we advise mariners to slow down.
More, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Does anything happen if people, commercial or non-commercial boaters, like, I'm going to say violate, but anyway, get closer than 100 yards or, don't follow the whale sense guidelines?
Dr. Tierling.
Thank you. So it can be challenging to differentiate between legal violations and breaking a guideline, but I'll do my best to explain. The 100-yard rule is hard and fast. If a boat approaches a whale knowingly within 100 yards, it's a legal violation, and the NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement can investigate that and press charges if they find it necessary. There are other ways that take and harassment can be verified, and those are legal. The Whale Sense program is a voluntary program, as our TVMP, and NOAA has a set of wildlife viewing guidelines that is much broader than our tour area. It applies to all marine mammals, and we have even a specific version for Alaska. And those, of course, are just best practices. We advise people to follow those to help keep them out of that gray area of take. And by following the guidelines, they might be better set up to avoid inadvertent take.
So I have a question about the 100 yards. Seems pretty small to me. And obviously Glacier Bay is a national park, and if they are federal waters, and so they have implemented much stricter rules there. But it was also based on science regarding noise and disturbance and moving away from feeding grounds. Is any of that research relevant here? And who made up 100 yards? And how did we know it was 100 yards and not a quarter mile or whatever? It just does seem pretty close.
Thank you. as I mentioned, 100 yards was implemented over 20 years ago, and there is an argument for looking back at our regulations to see if they need updating. The regulations, as you mentioned, in Glacier Bay fall under a different set of rules under the national park, and they can pull different levers and implement things in different ways. And to my knowledge, weren't looking at the same metrics that we are, but they're still relevant. And we do look at them. And I think in part to the life history of these animals, they're really challenging to study and to really get those controls to understand, where those thresholds are.
That's all the questions it looks like we have. Thank you for the presentation, all this good information. Thank you, Mr. Janes, and everybody who went to all those meetings. Do you have the assembly? Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to take a break, Ms. Hale?
I want to take a break, but I think talking about it right now would be great. I believe Ms. Pierce is still online, and I would hope that we could talk a little bit about options that we have available to us. Mr. Janes talked about some form of limited entry, and maybe that has to come from CBJ, and what forms of limited entry we might have. I mean, we had one email to us today talking about business licenses, and so anyway, I would like to talk about that.
Ms. Pierce, if you would come back, and I did ask a question of Mr. James regarding, if they're all coming from CBG Harbors, we could do that, but they're not. So what ideas do you have regarding this question?
I would like to thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would like to come back to the Assembly with some recommendations. I don't think it's really fair to speculate without talking to law and to docks and harbors about what we can and cannot do. So like I said at the beginning of this presentation, I'm happy to do some research and come back to the Assembly with a set of recommendations and some more firm guidance on what our authority is.
Okay, that sounds great. More questions, Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. That does sound great. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. A question for you, just to freshen my mind. The city's relationship to TBMP and the guidelines in the industry. Currently, the city does not have. How involved have we been, just in a soundbite, I guess?
In a soundbite, very involved, and we require our permittees in our loading zones to be TBMP members. So that's really our hook with TBMP.
So can I ask a follow-up? So for instance, just saying this while it's fresh in my mind, but so it sounded like from our first presentation that limited entry was something they talked about and were interested in and just couldn't get there themselves. But theoretically, we could work with TBMP if we wanted to shape a program like that and then embed that into TBMP. Is that correct?
Ms. Pierce. I mean, we could embed it in TBMP.
Thank you.
We could also make our own regulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
both of
maybe
those.
that's a bit more of a complex thought. I can follow up with you when you come back to us.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to our guests here tonight. I think you guys are should get a kudos for trying to self-regulate. That's always makes life a little bit better for everybody. And thank you for Dr. Tierlink. That's always informational listening to you. It would just be an interesting question to how many vessels you guys think would be limited entry. For have 75 now. Is that one of the reasons you couldn't agree, I guess is the question? How many bullets you would see? That's your name.
Mr. James, would you like to come up and or whoever?
I think I could take that one. I did attend the meetings where we were discussing limited entry.
It's a difficult one to answer now because I don't
Fair enough. Yep. So you didn't come up with a number, but if asked to, you probably, yep, got it. All right. Well, Ms. Pierce, did you have a comment about numbers?
No, I was just going to field that if Mr. James wasn't able to come up to the dais, but I think you got your answer. Thank you.
You good? Okay, we are done with this topic for today. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. Again, thanks for trying to work together on this. Stop pressing the button. We'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, we'll call the committee of the whole back to order. We're on item 2 and I know there are a number of people heading to Sitka this evening and they all want to leave by sometime not that long from now. Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just very briefly, you have in your packet the memorandum from the August Committee of the Whole. And after contemplating that, you decided to receive testimony, which you did at the last assembly meeting. You received orally, and you've had a number of good written comments as well. So I think it's back to the assembly to try and find if you can get philosophical alignment on a direction.
All right, thank you, Mr. Watt. So back to when we started the last COW, we talked about the why, like why are we doing this? We just want to remind people we have current maps that have hazards designated and that restrict development in those hazard zones. Everybody seems to agree that those current maps are not as good as they should be. So that hence the attempt to get a better map, which we embarked on. It's turned into this long process. So some people said words I'm not going to repeat now. So there are restrictions based on if you're in that map or not. So the question is, what responsibility does CBJ have to notify people of potential hazards? What responsibility does CBJ have to regulate development in those places that are hazard? And, the entire country is dealing with that. Should you have not allowed housing to be built where there was a mudslide, blah, blah. So that's where we are. And I just want to, I want to pass out what we agreed to at the last COW and then see if we can make it one step further or if we're at all close at anything. So I had it all in pretty colors and then I forgot it. So you'll have to check it out. Do I have enough coming back there? So the first, is that enough? You guys have enough? Okay, I'll give these ones to them. So the first part is this is what we did on the last time. And we said, let's see what people think about that. And what that is, repeal the existing adoptive maps, don't adopt the new maps, conduct annual public outreach, and require CBJ to notify anyone wishing to develop inside the map area that the maps exist. And then we put it out to the public and we heard the testimony from folks, what they thought of that idea. So the first motion there is just the same thing, except for the underlying things are suggested new things. And the first
Madam
couple,
Chair, point of order, these seem to be your motions.
well,
So then you should pass the baton. So
well, I just want to explain. I'm not even making it. I'm not making the motion. I'm just explaining what I'm trying to see if we can do or not. And if someone wants to make the motion, make the motion. If you don't like it, don't make the motion. So it's just a restatement of what we already agreed to with the addition of, we heard a lot of testimony on, don't make it clear that these are general maps, that they're not site specific. They're not predictive of a hazard in a certain place. So there's some suggested language that says that, and just, it doesn't have to be this language. It's just the idea being people want to be clear to lenders and everybody that just because you're inside this map doesn't mean you are predicted to be in a hazard. So the language I suggest someone might move if they want is these maps, to put a notice on the maps that say these maps identify zones of general potential hazard and are to be used solely for informational purposes. The maps are not predictive of precise hazards for individual properties, and site-specific engineering would be necessary to determine actual risks to individual properties. So that's just, I'm just trying to move the ball forward. If someone likes that ball movement, have at it, or if you want a different ball. And again, if we agree on the why, there are lots of hazards in town all over. We're not addressing, as we know, we had the yokel up and all kinds of things. Again, this is just because we have adopted maps that everybody agrees aren't that great. What are we going to do about that? So go forth and Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Did you inquire with any lending institutions or insurance agents to find out what the consequences of either motion 1 or motion 2 would be?
I only what was in the Rand Corporation thing that we got that in our packet. No, I was just trying to write something that what I heard from testimony. Please don't, let people think these maps are predictive about my property. So no, I don't have any more information than that we got from Mr. Chambor in that memo that's in our packet.
Thank you. I could support motion 1, or I could make that motion whenever you're ready, Madam Deputy Mayor.
You could make it if you wish.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I'd like to move that the Assembly does not wish to adopt the Tetra Tech map and to repeal the adopted 1987 landslide and avalanche maps. And I'll ask for unanimous consent.
So Mr. Bryson, just to be clear, are you including all of motion 1 that's on this page?
Motion 1 as written on this page, yes.
Okay,
Madam
thank
Deputy
you.
Mayor.
So now we can discuss it and people can wordsmith or object, or Ms. Wall and then Ms. Hale.
A few things. I'm definitely more supportive of motion 2, but we can talk about that in a second. My first question is about the public information outreach. I wasn't at the last committee of the whole, but I listened to it. Maybe staff could let me know what this means to them. Are we providing maps to people who are in the maps? Are we letting everyone generally know there are hazards? Are we not providing any direction and staff would figure that out?
Mr. Watt, when we talked about it, we were trying to be vaguer so staff would figure it out, but that was the idea, unless you want to be prescriptive. Mr. Watt.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I'm guessing we would be overly broad in providing information. So if the Assembly was interested in providing information, we might distribute it to, say, all of the downtown area.
To what?
All of the downtown area, rather than to geographically only provide information to somebody in the map.
Ms. Wall, go ahead.
What about the level of information? Like, I guess I want people who, I'm fine with the whole public knowing that there's hazards, but I want people who are in these zones and people who are going to buy in these zones and rent in these zones to have this information. And so would you say you need more direction from the Assembly to do that?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think not, although in the, the devil's always in the details. So in the course of coming up with some information for the public, if we had a question, we'd come back to the body, but I think not. I think we would just factually provide the information as concisely and efficiently as we're able.
I think Ms. Hughes-Candies, yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, you want to go, Ms. Hale?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Hale, and then Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Okay, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I object to everything that's proposed, and I'd like to speak to my objection, if I may. I even object to what we came up with on August 28th, because, and this feeds into why I object, because I realize if we repeal the existing adopted maps and we repeal the existing ordinance, we do have the Barron's Avenue neighborhood that is in a direct path of an avalanche, and we don't know if and when that avalanche is going to occur, but there's a high likelihood. And it has been CBJ policy for a very long time that no new houses be built in that path. So I don't think we necessarily thought of that on August 28th. Here's where I'm coming from after reading many emails with very, very well-considered and detailed ideas and suggestions for us. I feel like first, do no harm. And right now, it feels like we're flailing around trying to do something because we feel like harm has been done and we're trying to help people. But we don't understand this very well because it's complicated and it's hard. It concerns me gravely that we could unintentionally open a door or close a door without really looking at and understanding the superb public testimony that we've had and the information that's been provided to us. I feel like we need an expert a consultant probably to consult for CBJ to review that testimony and then to make some proposals, very clear proposals to the assembly so that we're not trying to set an important public policy that could have huge ramifications that we just don't even know to think of.
Ms. Hughes-Gandy's.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think first to follow up on what that would look like to Mr. Watt. Among the suggestions that we received, someone suggested that when transferring property, that could be a part of disclosure. You disclose other things. You could also disclose when selling property. This is in these maps that exist but weren't adopted. I guess just process wise, is that seems like that gets kind of out of CBJ's purview, and I am naive about that process, like what makes something be disclosed when you're selling a house versus not. You know, some of that is found on an inspection. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that a little bit, because that's something that was suggested by a resident and then it was echoed by other residents. Let
Mr.
me
Watt.
know if this is way off
Mr. Watt.
field.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So, I mean, as a general course, disclosure is an issue that arises between property owners and banks in a real estate function. And the city is not in the middle of that, setting the rules on how and when you disclose information.
Thanks. I guess I just wanted that confirmed.
Mr. Smith and then Madam Mayor.
Thanks. It's following up on,
Sorry.
Well, go ahead. Mr. Smith, Madam Mayor, Wahal Gidak and Mr. Bryson.
just following up on that, just because the city doesn't mean we couldn't require disclosure during when there's new leases being signed or transfer of property. I mean, right?
Deputy Mayor, I'll grab this and Ms. Lane may feel some discomfort on this topic. But so if the city just has a thought process required that information be disclosed upon transfer of property, you know, I think the attorneys would look for case law and they would be like, okay, do we have a rational basis for doing this? Probably. Do we have an enforcement mechanism? And then what happens if, you know, if somebody doesn't disclose? And I think it rapidly gets back to it's a business transaction between two parties. So I think it would be easy for us to encourage disclosure. We probably could pass an ordinance requiring it, but when things fall apart, I'm not really sure what happens, and I'm not sure what other models would be out there.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to object to the motion. I think I'm like Ms. Wall that I might be able to do something with motion number 2, because we do have hazards. We're trying to figure out. I think we can all say with agreement that the Tetra Tech maps probably will not be adopted. But we do have a hazard and they are shown on the old map. So I would probably explore that a little bit. I liked where Mrs. Ms. Hale was going, but I disagree with the consultant. I think we're working through this with our public. And I mean, that's why we have all these different motions. I think Ms. Gladys Shepsey was trying to do the will of the public. So and just, you know, if we get it wrong by the time it gets to the assembly, I'm sure we'll hear from these fine folks and have to start again, but I disagree with the motion.
Wahal Gidak.
Yeah, mine is, I'm going to object also, but I have a procedure question on this objection because if this motion fails, because a lot of us want the avalanche in there, does the entire motion, can we not vote on these existing components of this motion again because the motion has failed? Do we need to make an amendment right now to include the avalanche, which is essentially motion number 2?
We can, somebody can make that. I think you're right. We should just make it now and say, I'd like it to be 2 or the amendment or go.
I'll just add the avalanche sentence to,
Okay.
that's my
Okay.
amendment.
So the amended God motion is to add the language to substitute. Mr. Bryson, would you consider your motion number 1? And how do you feel about motion number 1 now that you've heard people talk?
I can remove my motion, but I'd like to speak to it first and then I'll
Okay.
remove it if
Okay,
you
fair enough.
allow me the time. Okay, so we have been talking about cost of housing and how are we going to lower the cost of housing? And we have had the same maps since 1987. If we keep any component of this map in place, we are going to get the exact same results. We cannot get people to build downtown. And part of the reason we can't get them to build downtown is because we have rules that prohibit cost-effective building downtown. So keeping avalanches or landslides, we are asking to continue on the exact same path that we have been on since 1987, and we will get the exact same number of downtown buildings in the permit process that we've got in the last few years. The ramifications of keeping these maps have already occurred. They've already stifled development. They've already jacked the cost of living here in Juneau. I think that somebody made a really good point. The city is not in real estate. So we should not have the city in the real estate transaction dictating the terms. That's why I asked the very specific question, what lenders and insurance people, because those are the professionals that would make this determination. And those are the people that are going to have the financial connection to make sure that it's a good decision and that it's being developed and designed properly. The best thing we can do to move housing and the cost of living in Juneau is to remove these maps and allow the lenders and the insurance companies to help develop the more hazard-prone areas that exist in all of Juneau, not in just the downtown area, would be setting a precedence of letting Juneau continue to develop in the future. At this time, I'm going to remove motion 1 that I made.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Wahal Gidak, would you like to make a motion?
Madam Mayor, may I make a point of order, or Deputy Mayor, sorry. Are there sufficient copies in the back, or perhaps when someone makes a motion, can they read every bullet that's on here so everybody is clear on?
You don't have copies?
Proposed.
Here's some copies.
Sorry.
Want to hand up? Somebody want them? Mr. Bryson.
Okay, can I wait till they get it?
You bet. And so the reason I put in 2 is because of the landslides are more, we haven't heard a lot of objections. They are more predictable. There's a path. I'm sorry, avalanche. So that's why I wasn't, because what we did at the COW, I wanted to follow it. That was what 1 is, and 2 is something else.
Right.
Wahal Gidak.
Yeah, I move motion number 2, which is to direct the attorney to draft an ordinance that accomplishes the following. Repeals the adopted 1987 landslide maps, does not adopt the Tetra Tech landslide maps, adopts the Tetra Tech avalanche maps, requires CBJ to conduct an annual public information outreach regarding potential landslide and avalanche hazards, requires CBJ to notify anyone wishing to develop inside the mapped area that the maps exist, requires CBJ to include a prominent notice on the front of the maps that contains the following language. These maps identify zones of general potential hazard and are to be used solely for informational purposes. The maps are not predictive of precise hazards for individual properties, and site-specific engineering would be necessary to determine actual risk to individual properties.
Thank you. Okay. Wall, Ms. Wall.
Objecting for a question. So if this motion was adopted eventually at the full assembly, the regulations that we have in place for avalanche for avalanches would stay in effect. I believe, but you can confirm, that the planning commission and staff did work up suggesting updates to the regulation on avalanches, or was there the last place they got same regulations as we currently have?
What?
Deputy Mayor, there has been a lot of thinking, and I do think if this motion passed, that we would need to clarify our regulatory stance on avalanches. And I do think, I don't have that information right now, but I do think there would be some updates that would clarify. I do also think in the Tetra Tech maps, they had some useful things like predicted impact pressures that could inform building standards.
And so if we were to pass this, you all would bring us that information, or would you want us to keep this in committee to have that discussion?
Mr. What?
Deputy Mayor, I think that the most prudent course would be to bring it back to committee and bring you back an ordinance that enacts these changes and what I'm going to broadly characterize as housekeeping and modernization changes to the avalanche section of the code.
Mr. Bryson.
I'm also going to object to this motion. I believe that if we keep these avalanche, and especially adopting the Tetra Tech, that we're only doing the exact same thing that we're trying to avoid to do. We want the community to be able to develop downtown. I believe if we adopt the Tetra Tech avalanche, that we will be in this exact same paused out place without development. Thank you for the time.
Madam Mayor.
So if we're going to keep this in the committee of the whole, I would like to see the difference between the 1987 avalanche maps and the Tetra Tech avalanche maps. So I'm assuming would be part of your presentation.
Mr. Watt.
Deputy Mayor, we'd bring that back, but I can advise you that the avalanche mapping is substantially similar.
Ms. Hale and then Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I appreciate what Mr. Bryson is saying, but I also am rather attuned to the Barron's Avenue houses that had a really terrible avalanche happen in 1962. It has been stated that, maybe it's not going to avalanche anymore, but I think it would be shameful if we allowed more houses to be built, like that street extended or something. And if we want to address, if we want to limit in scope, and it sounds like maybe that's where this is headed, we could revisit that 1987 ordinance and just focus on what we do want to limit, which is not, development downtown, for example. I will also point out that many buildings have been built downtown, including apartment buildings on Gastineau Avenue since the 1987 maps were put in place within the last 20 years, actually. So some of what we've got going on right now that held the Glory Hall up for a year is interpretations by our current staff. So those interpretations, maybe those could be clarified by changing that 1987 ordinance so that it's very specific to what we want to protect for. I am also just going to reiterate what I said before, and I obviously the will of the body is what it is. I feel that I and this body are woefully inadequate to make a decision, given the information that I have been able to digest up to this point.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
This time.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to object to ask a clarifying question. At some point in the testimony, there was concern raised by folks who had gone through the process of doing site-specific analysis to show that their property was not to get out of the hazard zone, especially essentially they were in it, they did the analysis and they were good. And they wanted to be sure that whatever we did was not going to just put them back in it when they've already done the analysis. So it seems like they're two very different things. So does anything exist where someone's done avalanches, you know, come from above? This is not a situation where someone's going to have done some kind of analysis on their private property and then be lumped back in. Or I would just want that to be cared for in the ordinance, I guess.
Mr. Watt?
Deputy Mayor, I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like over 98% sure that when people have done site-specific analysis, it has not been on the avalanche side of the mapping.
I have a feeling that I think that's right myself. Ms. Wall and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the event that I'm not in the assembly when this comes to the full assembly, I feel like I need to push back on some of Mr. Bryson's comments. Yes, we want to be developing housing downtown, but I think one thing I learned from the last 2 years listening to this is that the public does not yet know how serious the risk of landslides are in Juneau, and that they're getting worse every day with climate change, and that we do need to continue to educate each other about that risk.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think just a question, I guess, for you is, or whoever drafted the motion, and the intent is the disclaimer, is that to kind of do what Ms. Hughes Candies had been asking at during the public testimony about how we like reduce the harm or unring the bell or whatever? Very good. I guess because we haven't checked with, I guess a course of action that maybe I'd suggest is to direct staff to work with financing professionals, whatever, property appraisers, that, and come up with the disclaimer that we know will actually do what we're seeking to do.
Sure, fair enough. I did work with the attorney on this, so I didn't, completely know
Okay.
off the top of my head. And again, yeah, I don't know if there's anybody who wants to speak to that, Mr. Watt.
Deputy Mayor, I think a draft ordinance is a great vehicle to attract public testimony. So obviously a lot of people are paying attention, and so we'll make sure people in the banking sector are aware of the draft ordinance.
Sure.
Mr. Smith.
Another thing, I guess, is this annual public informational outreach piece. I guess I still haven't, the way I thought when we voted on it on the August 28th meeting is that it was going to go out to all people in the community saying that their risk exists. A concern I had and mentioned then is, again, we are aware that we've just studied this small area of town, but that we know risks exist throughout the borough. And I just want to make, I guess I just hadn't gotten clarity that I don't want to be just saying, oh, you live in this area that was studied, you need to be informed now. It's like, that puts those property owners at a distinct disadvantage and doesn't provide the public correct information. So I guess I'm still looking for clarity on what that looks like, and that it's not, I mean, I don't just want it to go to people in the study area or people anyway.
I will just speak to, when we talked about this, we kind of left it vague so that the staff could work on it. And I didn't want to be, you must mail out a poster on Tuesday. So they could come up with what they recommend when they bring it back to the committee, and, or if the assembly wants to be specific, then you'd be.
I mean, I don't want to get too into the weeds on it either, but I just want to be, anyway, I'd have a significant problem with that.
Mr. Watt, have you
Yeah.
any comment on that?
Deputy Mayor, I think when staff brings this back and brings a draft ordinance back, we can kind of elucidate our thinking, and the assembly can decide if that thinking is.
You'll kind of detail.
Close enough.
Yeah, you'll kind of detail what you envision this public information looking like. Okay, I'm fine with that.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think what we're tiptoeing around is the responsibility of the landowner. Well, I understand where you guys are pushing back on what my comments were, but to address like the Barron's Avenue issue, I'm going to still put it back on the property owner's responsibility, because if a person wanted to buy a piece of property near Barron's Avenue and a bank was willing to finance them and an insurance company was willing to insure them, then if they own the land, why would we stop them? Now, here's the part that we're not talking about. Most people are not going to go actively search out a hazard zone. And so the concern that we would have a whole bunch of people building in hazard zones because we don't have a hazard or an avalanche zone labeled, I think that would be mistaken thinking, because people are going to look at that and be like, oh, wow, that's a horrible place to go put my new home that I want to have 50% down because I'm building. So I have to have 50% cash. So there are decisions that are going into it. I would like to have this ordinance, any of the draft ordinance or the way that we proceed on this, to have the appropriate level of responsibility on the property owner. While we are the stewards of our city, people can own their little piece of property. And if we can allow them to own in any part of the community with the same level of responsibility, I think we're doing everybody a favor and not a disservice by putting the responsibility on the property owner. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. More comments on the motion? I'll make a comment. I'll speak in favor of the motion. I think it's a good, basically, compromise. Again, it comes back to what responsibility does the government have to inform people of hazards? And I'm into the inform as opposed to the regulate that we were doing. Mind you, when something falls in the ocean, people do, a good chunk of the community says, why did you let them build there? We already heard that when the houses fell in the river. So I think I'm just trying to balance all of those interests. We have information that we think is better than the 1987 maps. Is it perfect? It is not. Is it better? I think so. So I think we have a responsibility to tell people. And I'm also with Mr. Bryson. Once we tell people, then somehow they have to take that information and assess their own risks. So there are communities that after something falls in the oceans, California, all kinds of people with climate change, they're actually going the other way and putting more restrictions on developing in hazard zones. And our public is not interested in that. And so I think this is personally a good compromise. We are giving you the best information we have. And please use it responsibly, basically. So and I think avalanches are different. They're much more, we're better at that. And we didn't hear a lot of objections to that. And the paths are clearer than the landslide paths. So that's why I think the avalanche stuff is all right to leave in. So that's my speaking in favor of the motion. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I agree that people own property and they should be able to do what they want with it, but I also believe that some of the people that died in the mudslide just down the street many, many years ago were living in an apartment building. So because you own the property and then you choose to develop it in a high hazard zone, doesn't mean that you're always going to own the property. And what we see over and over again is places with risk are often populated by people on the lower end of the economic scale. So I agree, we have to balance responsibility, personal responsibility and our responsibility. But I'm going to vote against this anyway.
Thank
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Madam Chair. I would just very briefly say, I speak in favor of this. This has been a far from perfect process, but I think this is getting towards striking that balance that you just spoke to. So I don't need to repeat everything you said, except to say, I do think a piece of this that has been somewhat missing, and we have received some testimony to back this up, or people saying consider this, but it is getting warmer and it is getting wetter. And I think when the tree slid down on Gastineau, you know, if that individual had not taken an extra shift that night, I think the public sentiment would be very different if he had died. And so that's the other piece of that I'm trying to keep in my head. So I'll be supporting.
Okay, we're ready for the most for the voting. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So for the motion number 2, Bilal Hidag.
Yes.
Ms. Wall,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
No.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
Deputy Mayor Gladysevsky,
Yes.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion carries 5 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you, everybody. That was not easy. You'll see it again and see what happens. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're just moved it to the next meeting because there's still a lot of discussion that needs to happen on this.
Yeah. Okay, we have something else on the agenda, but I know people want to executive session on law department. So if somebody, who's going to move that, Madam Mayor? Move us into executive session. Ms. Wall, do you have Mr. Bryson, do you want to move us into executive session?
Madam Deputy Mayor, I request that we move into executive session where we'll be discussing topics that could prejudice us towards a person, and we will be discussing a litigation update. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Hearing no objection, no members of the public are objecting. So we were going to move into executive session. Madam Clerk has a statement to make.
Thank you. For those of you who are in the Zoom or the in-person audience, we are going to clear the room, and in the official meeting at this time in the public session. And the deputy mayor has informed me that we will not be coming back into public session at the end of the executive session. So the public session is now at an end. Thank you.